Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a thrill to be with you.
You're so sweet. I am excited to talk to you because your book, I've been sober a long time and I've seen your book over and over again by my guests who they talk about. Always ask, what are some of your favorite books? And your book, Drink, The Intimate Relationship Between Women and Alcohol, has come up over and over again. And finally, I got the audiobook. So I'm super excited to have you here. How long ago did you write the book?
The book came out in 2013, and very soon after the Washington Post named it one of the top 10 books of the year. And
That's
then I
amazing.
did a
Congratulations.
TEDx talk that's had 1.5 million views.
What was that like? Oh, 1.5 million. That's amazing.
Yeah, that was really exciting.
Where did you do the TED Talk?
Amazingly, I flew to New Zealand. There was a young woman who wanted me to come to New Zealand, and I said, I'll come and do it. And so I did.
That's amazing. New Zealand. That is a long flight.
That's a long flight. It's a long way to go to do a TEDx
That's
talk.
TEDx Talk. But I mean, what an honor to do the talk and to have it resonate with so many people. That's really incredible. What did that feel like?
It was so powerful. Gabor Mate had me come up in a conversation he was having with an audience last year and said, "Do you know how many viewers you had?" And I said, "I have no idea. Don't ever look at that." And he said, "You're kidding me. You have more than 1.2 million at that point." It felt really powerful because I grew up in a time when my mother was a severe alcoholic, cross-addicted to Valium, as many people were, Betty Ford, et cetera, in the era of the 60s. And it felt like my lifeblood to stand there and out myself and talk about why it was important that we recover out loud. It was critical to me that we break the silence that really caused so much suffering for my mother.
Yeah.
And for the family.
Yeah. And I just think it's beautiful how each generation has the opportunity to break the cycle for the next. So, yeah, it's always tragic to look at our moms and think of all that they had to endure in silence with no solutions. We are so blessed to be in the age where we can recover out loud now.
We are so blessed. We are so
There's,
blessed. It's such a different time. Even when I wrote my book in 2013, things were very different than they are today.
isn't that amazing? Just 10 years.
Mhm.
Listen,
Mhm.
I mean, congratulations on your 10-year anniversary and being named one of the top 10 books by Washington Post. That had to be so validating
It
as a writer.
was.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
really
very
incredible.
exciting.
Do you still get fan mail?
I do. I get a
Isn't
lot of
that
fan mail.
amazing? Do
I
you?
get a lot of fan mail, and it's a treat. It's a real treat
Yeah,
and very moving.
yeah.
And I write back to everyone and I've made some really profound connections in my life. This
Wow.
way, I've made friends. I've made deep and lasting connections with people.
That's beautiful. I mean, I love how you just casually name dropped Gabor Mate. He's like, yeah, he's my friend.
He-
He's amazing too.
He's amazing. He's
Yeah,
amazing. And he is
yeah.
my friend. He's
Well,
a
that's
lovely
so
man.
cool. Yeah, very cool. He's done a lot of great work too. But we're going to talk about you today. I loved your book. And so before we jump into that, I have a little game that I like to play called the lightning round, which is actually very slow. I say the same thing. My listeners are going to be like, you need to rename it. It's just a few questions to sort of front load the episode with some resources. So when you first got sober, were there any books that really helped you early in
Hmm.
recovery?
Hmm. That would have been Carolyn Knapp's Drinking a Love Story, which I carried around with me for, I would say, 8 years. Because in Carolyn Knapp's beautiful, beautiful book, there is a quiz to take to learn whether you are an alcoholic or not. And I use that term because that's what I thought of myself as and what I was hoping I wasn't. And I took that on business trips with my fancy job, and kept it hidden and took the quiz over and over, and I could see the progression of my drinking. And it was is a very, very dear possession of mine, that book.
Wow, 8 years is a long time. So you wrestled with the idea of being an alcoholic for that long.
And there was a point in my time when I was, as they say in AA, doing a little research, still wondering if I was or I wasn't, when I had some dental work done and I didn't drink for 3 weeks, as the dentist told me not to. And my son gave me a handmade Happy Mother's Day card, portrait of a happy mother, and I thought it was beautiful. Until I read the fine print and said she has white eyes, not bloodshot eyes. She is drinking Perrier, not wine. And
Ouch.
ouch, ouch. I have that framed in my bedroom because it's really why I got sober.
Wow, that's beautiful. How was your son? How old was your son at that time?
I would say he was about 17, 16, 17.
Oh, okay. He was older.
He was older,
Yeah.
and he and my best friend sat me down and really persuaded me to go to rehab, which I did. And I took a big sledgehammer. I thought I'm going to end up wasting my whole life. So I was very fortunate.
That's beautiful. I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that time, but I have a few questions. So the podcast is called One Day at a Time, and I've been asking my guests, what does that mean to you?
It's such a beautiful phrase, isn't it?
Mhm.
Um, it's really a totemic phrase for me. I think that one of the things that gets us, I will speak only for women, but is the shame of drinking. And really, we can't look backwards. We aren't going that way, as someone famously said. And I find even now in my 15th year of sobriety that I have to really remind myself. I tend to ruminate and I can worry about the future. And I have to, one day at a time saves me all the time to keep me in the present moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Just had to take a deep breath because it's so easy to fall into the I have to do this, I have to do that, like fall under the weight of the shoulds, or like I should
Yes.
be different than I am, or I need to do these things so that I could be okay. And it is also just like such a relief to realize that we're just doing this one day at a time.
Yes.
I
It's
have to
really
ask you,
beautiful phrase.
what does a totemic phrase, what does that mean? That's a big word. That's so
It
silly.
means it's like a totem that you carry in your pocket, something
Mm.
very precious,
Oh,
something
that's
very
beautiful.
precious that, I remember in those early days of being sober that I would go into the washroom at a social event and say the Serenity Prayer. I'm sure many of us have.
Oh yeah.
And then it wasn't one day at a time. It was one morning at a time, one afternoon, and one evening. So to
Yeah.
be able to say one day is actually a very beautiful grown-up thing to be able to say.
Amen to that. That's right. Thanks for explaining that. I was like, oh, that's a big word. I'm just going to ask. Sounded like totem, but wasn't sure. Do you have a regular self-care routine? And that could be like a morning practice, a weekly schedule, or even, I don't know, like I like to do an annual retreat. What does that look like for you?
For me, it looks like my what I call my serenity sister, someone who's been with me since I got sober and really saved my life. She and I exchange our gratitude list each and every morning, the fifth thing always being for our connection, our sober connection. And the rule is it has to be different every day. So you can't repeat yesterday's. We're both writers, and that's a treat. And I exchange a gratitude list with someone in the United States as well. I'm in Canada, and it's a profound part of flexing a muscle of gratitude. Is a profound part of my sobriety and staying sober. The other thing I do is I host Ola Sober, which is a group out of Madrid, an international group for women. And I host every Friday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, which is something that I consider to be really important in terms of giving back and grounding myself at the same time, um, with the meeting with women all over the world.
All over the world. Is that like a Zoom meeting?
Right.
Is it open to everyone? Like, is
Eh,
that a resource we could share?
Absolutely.
Oh, how
Always
exciting.
sober.
Okay, well, I'll get that from you later and then I'll put it in the show notes in case anybody wants to. That's fancy. I'm so excited. 8 a.m. Eastern. Okay, that's 6 a.m. my time. That's fine. um, what's funny is I named my podcast 7 years ago after a meeting that I would go to at 6 a.m. called ODAT. So
Oh,
yeah,
I
no
love
strange.
it.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Um, no problem. And if there was one thing that you wish you knew when you first got sober, what would that be?
That it's fun.
Oh, it is, right?
That it's fun to be sober. I just returned from a writer's retreat festival in Mexico, and you can have a great time. And I wasn't sure. I thought it was where fun went to die, sobriety, but it isn't where fun goes to die. It's far from it.
Listen, we are a group of people who insist on having a good time, as they say.
That's right.
Are you fluent in Spanish?
I'm not.
Oh, you're not.
No, I absolutely am not. I just, it was an English language festival and it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm half Mexican, so one of my greatest shames is that I'm not fluent. So,
Oh, how amazing. Where did you grow up?
well, I grew up here, but my mother
But
was
your
born
f-
in,
your mother was Mexican.
yeah, she was born and raised in Mexico City.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah, so we went back there about 6 years ago for my abuelita's 90th birthday party. She's
Oh,
96 and a half now. My people live a long time. But yes.
wow.
Yeah, and they all look like me. They're all kind of fair complected and brown hair. But yeah, I have lots and lots of family in Mexico all over. But
Beautiful.
I know
Such
I
a
need to,
beautiful country.
it really is.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah. I need to go back. But yeah. Okay. So you did a writer's retreat. There is so much fun to be had in sobriety. And I was just talking with somebody earlier today about, when you quit drinking, you suddenly have a lot of free time. And so it's important to find a hobby, but so often people don't recognize, and as a psychotherapist, I'm sure you would agree with this, that it takes a little while for your dopamine reward system, like your neurotransmitters, to sort of heal and reset. So I've often heard people complain that like they're bored at first. And my interpretation of that boredom is that, addiction is like a narrowing of things that bring pleasure. So it takes a minute sometimes for that to reset. And there is a period of cultivation that can happen if you have a little bit of curiosity and a little bit of willingness to experiment with fun things, right?
I agree with you. I agree with you. It really is the unpeeling of the ever unfolding artichoke of life is the way I think of it, is just we blossom and we get to choose what we're going to leave behind and what we want to venture onwards to. I mean, I went back to school at 64 and became a psychotherapist after 40 years of journalism. So all things are possible.
That's beautiful. I keep saying that, but I keep thinking it's not too late for me to go back to school.
It isn't.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations. That's a big deal.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit. Let's kind of talk about that's it for the lightning round. That wasn't too bad, right?
Yeah, it was fun.
Let's talk a little bit kind of how we got here. I'm going to encourage everyone to read the book, but for those who haven't, could you just give us a little brief? I like to hear about like the family of origin, because I feel like what happens in childhood sort of sets the stage for the rest of our lives. It sets the stage for our addictions. And could you just sort of go over a little bit about what life was like as a little girl and when the addiction started?
Yes. So as I shared, my mother was a very beautiful woman who kept for quite a long time the secret that she drank during the day, from my father, who was always living on another continent. He was in mining, and so he was always in either South Africa or Australia. And so we were growing up, and he would go for 9 months. So her drinking was, I'm the eldest of three children. Her drinking was really quite um, a secret. And it wasn't until we moved to South Africa when I was 9 years old that my father discovered that my mother actually was drinking during the day. And my mother held it together for some time, but it had a huge effect on me because really I was the parentified child. And that was very difficult. When I went off to university, things were really grim in our house. My mother's cross addiction to Valium and alcohol was extreme. And she never did give up drinking, even though she lived to be in her 80s. So I went off and actually said, I will be just like my father. I'll be a workaholic. I will. And I was a workaholic a long time before I got into trouble with alcohol. I was highly successful in journalism in Canada, and I was happily married and had a beautiful little boy, and would sometimes drink more than other people, but really I held it together till I was in my 40s. And I began to suffer I had suffered always from very deep depressions, and I refused, because of my mother's Valium addiction, to ever take an antidepressant. And I thought I'd just walk it off, and that doesn't work.
Walk it off. That's like you're playing baseball and you get hit in the head. They're just like, walk it off.
All right, exactly. So what was a drink to unwind after a really busy day, standing at the counter chopping vegetables. I'd have a glass of wine. I have a glass of wine with dinner, and it was that way for a long time. And then my son left home, and I had a really bad case of empty nest syndrome and a very big case of um, depression, menopause, the perfect storm. You hear about this a lot in sober rooms. And I accepted an enormous job in a city. You've read the book, so you know, a city VP of McGill University in Montreal, Canada's probably most famous university, and took on a huge job, left journalism, and began to work really around the clock, and also started to abuse alcohol. Self-medicating for sure, numbing. I would say there was a lot of metabolized trauma in my life. And at that point, my father joined my mother in retirement and becoming an alcoholic, and he died of severe alcoholism.
Oh, he did. How old was your father when he passed?
About 84. And it was very, very sad. It was a very miserable death. And
Oh,
so I tried desperately when I got sober to save my father as well as save my mother, and neither worked. So I say in the book, a river runs through it. A river runs through my family. There are great uncles who took their lives because of alcohol. There's a lot of alcohol, a lot of what I call my Celtic blood disorder and the Irish bloodstream. Whether you can blame it or not, it is. And so it was a terrible secret in our relatively affluent home, and yet it wasn't a secret. Everybody knew my mother drank because she'd drink and dial. And so my life has been, I believe I was born to write this book because my life has been steeped in alcohol.
yeah, that's got to be so painful. I mean, it's so interesting, in a time where it was so hidden, like you might be able to hide the drinking, but you can't hide the effects of it,
Right,
right? Especially, and God forbid your mother be, in the social media age where people drink and
right,
do Facebook.
right, exactly.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that. So, okay, so your mom never gets sober and your father passes away from it. When did you decide that alcohol was the problem for you and that you wanted to get help? Were those two different times?
I would say that the biggest thing that happened to me is my partner of 14 years, the man I was engaged to be married to, sat me down and said, "You're drinking too much." My son sat me down and said, "You're drinking too much." My sister sat me down. My best friend sat me down. But it really took the death of my favorite cousin, who was killed by a drunk driver, with his youngest of 4 children in the front seat. She ended up with a brain injury. And I sat down, it was Father's Day, 2007, and I thought I lost my childhood to alcohol. I lost my cousin to alcohol, and now I'm losing myself to alcohol. And when I decided to quit, alcohol dug in. I had a very hard time. That was in June, and it wasn't until February that I went to rehab. So I would go to meetings. I would attempt to get sober, and it became worse. It actually became worse, which I think is not an unheard story.
Well, that's pretty common that once you decide to give it up, that it sort of takes a hold of you in like a deeper way, like
Yes,
sinks its claws into you, and that period of trying to
yes,
stop and not being able to, very painful time.
very, very painful. And then you hear the speech or the tape in your head, the ticker tape that says, "I'll never have fun again. I'll never laugh again. What if, what if I don't have champagne at my wedding?" And people
What
would
is
say,
that?
"What is
Everybody
it?"
thinks that. Isn't that
Everybody
weird?
says that, right?
Well,
Everybody says that.
yeah, I was 25 when I got sober, and that was my biggest fear. What am I going to do at my wedding? Side note,
25.
yeah, I got married. So I met my husband when I was 5 months sober. I know that's a no-no, but it's 28 years later. So far, so good. but that was one of my biggest fears. And guess what we drank at the wedding? Sparkling cider. And it was not it was not a thing. It was not even an issue.
Good for
And we had a
you.
really great time.
25.
Yeah. Like I said, I
Unbelievable.
crashed and burned early. I was a hot mess. And so
What a great
it was,
story.
yeah, it was of no merit. It was no merit. It was just, just so self-destructive that I had to get sober.
Good for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm super lucky. Okay. So how long was your rehab? It was like a 30-day rehab?
Yes.
And did
Yes.
they introduce 12 steps to you there?
They introduced everything, 12
Everything.
steps, smart recovery.
Ah,
We were introduced to a woman's way through the 12
yeah.
steps. We were introduced, which I love. We were introduced through to a number of modalities, and then you got
Yeah.
to choose.
So I interviewed Dr. Stephanie Covington after using her book for probably, I found her book early on and was using her works for like 20 years. And finally I reached out to her and I was like, "Will you come on the podcast?" And she did. But it was so important that, and this is one of the reasons why I loved your book, because we needed women's stories. We needed women to talk about what sobriety was like for women, because it's a different experience than what men go through.
No, so different. So different. Women do so much better in rehab than men do, and yet more men get to rehab because so often we have a complicated life with children.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really interesting sociological fact.
It really is. Yeah. And plus, I feel like there's kind of a safety component. Some 12, not all 12-step groups are created equal, and some are safer than others. And,
That's true.
that's something I learned a long time ago, that the court system is sending people to 12-step groups who don't really belong there. These aren't
Hmm.
always people who want to or need to quit, but they get in trouble through the court system and they're sort of court appointed. And so we have people in the rooms who aren't necessarily there for the right reasons, I would say.
Yes. Yes. Interesting.
Yeah, I had women pull me aside early on to be like, "Watch out for the wolves in sheep's clothing." They were like, "You need to go to the women's meetings." And I did not want to go there because there were no boys there. So I was young and silly. Um, but did you attend 12 step for a little? I have it in my notes. You did it for 7-8 years, maybe.
I did. And then my
Yeah.
book came out, and there were those who had trouble with my book. So it created, so I started going to 12-step meetings in other countries, and that was
Mhm.
interesting,
Yeah.
really interesting.
I wonder what your perspective is on the community at large, because I find I understand the protectiveness of there's like this really fierce protectiveness of like the program,
Right.
because I know for a lot of people it's a life and death um, situation. And, the 12 steps save a lot of people. I would include myself in that group. But then it becomes kind of like a religion
Mm-hmm.
where people are as like, this way is the only way kind of a thing, which
Mm-hmm.
never has sat well with me, because I never did just 12 steps. I've always done like a multitude of things. There's just so much available, like a Course in Miracles, and I like the Smart Recovery. There's Celebrate Recovery. There's so many things. Why do you think people are so? Why did you think that the people in those communities give you such a hard time about it? Your book.
To this day, I don't really know. The opening line probably that says walk into any AA group, and I think because I was very careful to say I went to a 12-step meeting, I didn't use you know, I didn't go through my own history and talk about it, but so I think I was just more candid than others. I would love to know if Carolyn Knapp went through the same kind of pushback.
Yeah, me
With
too.
Drinking a Love Story. I would love to know that. Of course, we can't ask her.
Well, maybe.
Hmm.
Maybe we can. Her book has come up so many times. She's another one on my list I'd love to talk to. Yeah, I'm in the process of writing my own 12-step exploration guide, and I do it fully aware that I'm going to be pissing people off on both sides of the fence. So
Right.
what are you going to do? When you have a calling, you have a calling. And okay, so you do the rehab, you spend quite a long time in 12 step, and that was 12 steps were a productive experience for you. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then you were able to take the elements of what you had learned and cultivate a new path of recovery. Is that fair?
Yeah. I think the my life had become quite sturdy by that point. My sobriety was sturdy. It wasn't until I found Ola sober 2 years ago that I could say I really found my tribe, my female tribe, who I count on, who I really am at home with, and that has been really profound in my life.
Yeah, I think everybody needs that. I don't think, we're not creatures that were meant to live in isolation. We're hardwired for community support.
Yes,
Yeah. So the format of that international group, is it like topic discussion?
that's right.
Yeah.
Side topic discussion. So the host opens with, say, 10 to 15. So when I was hosting last Friday, I was talking about the blessings of sobriety. And usually you will open with a poem or a piece of literature and then go forward from there and choose a topic, either an easy topic or a hard one. And there's just a fabulous group of women from around the world all weighing in, and the groups aren't too large, so you get your voice heard.
Nice.
Um, but there are so many options in modern recovery now. But I will say that it's free, which is unlike some of the other options. It is not that different from dollar in the basket 12 step in that sense of the word.
How do you feel about free recovery? There's a lot of expectation that recovery should be free. Do you have any opinions on whether it should be free or if it's okay to participate with a coach or somebody that specializes in sober coaching?
I think it's turned into quite a complicated, what I call the Walmartification of recovery, where I think some of the costs are just exorbitant and really difficult for me to understand. With that said, I am a psychotherapist that focuses on, amongst other things, addiction issues, and I think we all find our path. When I first was getting sober, I had an addiction doctor for whom I paid. I had a women's group. I had my 12-step group. I think it takes what it takes. And I
Mhm.
know many people have done well with a coach.
Yeah. Yeah. I think 12 step is great for handling sort of the crisis of the addiction. And for me, it was important to find a professional to help with sort of the root cause
Yeah.
issues. Yeah. So for me, there was a lot of trauma. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about um, trauma informed therapy. For a lot of us who had traumatic experiences as children, how does one, and I'm sure you could probably relate to sort of reparenting yourself in recovery, what are some of the tools or resources you would recommend for processing that trauma?
Well, we used to believe you ripped off the Band-Aid quickly and you leapt right into the trauma, and now we understand that there's, real problems with flooding and with being overwhelmed and re-traumatizing an
Yeah.
individual. So trauma-informed care, we meet the person where they are. In my case, I'm largely a female-only practice where you meet the woman where she is, and we go gingerly. We take it, as you say, a day at a time, one meeting at a time to um, go at their speed to unpack. And as I say, metabolize what needs to be metabolized, and that can take a while.
Yeah, it's that processing to resolution that I
Hmm.
found to be um, particularly productive with a therapist. I did something called process therapy years ago,
Hmm.
where she would have me do sort of it was almost like a guided meditation where she would ask me to scan my body and try to identify where the pain is. Is that something you're smiling? Is that something that you do too?
I've done that. I have done that. Definitely. It's very powerful, isn't it?
Hugely productive. She had me identifying parts that I didn't even know were there,
Mm.
and giving voice to for me it was like the pain and grief of what could have been,
Mhm.
or even mine was like childhood stuff, problems with my mom, or I experienced sexual abuse by a neighbor when I was very young, and my parents
Oh.
divorce, and yeah, and so there were parts of me that were exiled, basically
Mhm.
parts I had abandoned.
Mm.
And it was interesting that she created such a safe space for me that like my defenses came down and all that stuff was able to come up. It was able to arise. And then with her as the guide, she would help me like name it and feel it, and process it to resolution. Super,
Beautiful.
super productive. What do you do with people who, when you were talking about re-traumatizing, I had a friend who had really bad childhood trauma that was like ongoing for years and years. And she tried to do something called EMDR, the eye movement. Do you practice EMDR?
I don't, but I have as a client
Oh,
used
okay. So,
EMDR to deal with traumatic past. And I found it very effective.
yeah. But this woman that I was thinking of, she couldn't do it because it was about going back to that time and sort of reliving the experience. It was too traumatic. She couldn't do that. Um, or what other ways or modalities of healing can be used to address that kind of pain?
I would say that that is a long-term healing that a very skilled therapist who is willing to take their time with you can. I had a very traumatic childhood that was violent, and I have been able to process, not only process that childhood, but I was with my mother when she died, and so found some healing, found some. I won't use the word closure. I'm not sure I believe in closure, but I found
Either.
peaceful. I found peace.
Peace.
Peace. And that was working over quite a long time with a very, very skilled therapist. But there's no magic pill.
No, I heard this is a terrible analogy. Someone said there's no magic bullets, but there's lots of lead ones.
Oh,
Yeah, maybe not a great analogy. I was in sales when I heard that one. But yeah,
mhm.
there's so many different healing modalities of healing. So for me, it was just about exploring the different ones to find what worked for me.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But it's encouraging to hear that we can achieve that place of peace and that it doesn't have to drive all of our behaviors.
Yeah, I believe that.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the writing process because I know you have a writing. Remind me what the name of your writing program is. It writing, memoir
Right.
writing?
Yeah, it's called Writing Your Recovery. And it's for women recovering from anything. So recovering from definitely from alcohol dependence or from grief or eating disorders. I'm just naming some of the people that I've had in my course. It's an 8-week course, 2 hours for online Zoom with me. And it is very dynamic. We have women from all over the world. There's a noon offering and a later day offering, and people have produced articles for major magazines. One person has produced a final book. And so it's a very rich, very tight, very interesting course. I designed it as what would I want to have known had I not done my book? I would have not wanted to know how to find an agent, how to get
Mm,
published, how do you put a book together? How do you begin, middle, end? Maybe you don't even want to write a book. Maybe you want to just write an essay. I have people wanting to do all sorts of things in my course, and I just love giving it.
yeah, there's something about like telling the story that's so healing. What do you
I
think it is?
agree.
What do you think it is about the writing process that helps people, I don't know if it's like heal old wounds or just helps them further their recovery. What do you think it is about the writing that helps so much?
I think it's the greatest single portal to knowing yourself. You know, Joan Didion, the great writer, said we tell ourselves stories in order to live. But she went on to say that, in essence, and I'm paraphrasing, that we put it through our so-called typewriter to understand what we really know about something, what we really feel about something.
Yeah.
And as a writer, I will say that I need to put it through my typewriter to know what I really believe about something. And you metabolize what's happened to you. You
Yeah.
remember what's happened to you. You revisit what's happened to you. You can shape what's happened to you. It is a very powerful thing to do. And I believe it's accessible to us all, that private moment with the page, figuring out what it is you want to document about your life, what it is you want to reframe maybe,
Mhm.
or excavate. It's a beautiful process.
I like that idea of excavating and it, it is sometimes when I write, I don't really realize what I think until I start writing it. And I'm like, wait a minute, do I really believe that? Like it's an opportunity to re-examine long held beliefs that I didn't realize I was holding.
Absolutely.
I'm like,
It's a
this doesn't fit.
beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's like this doesn't fit for me anymore. And so I like the idea of reframing those beliefs.
Yes, it's a very beautiful process, very intimate. And I think 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, you can accomplish a lot.
Oh, huge. Yeah. Um, yeah, the writing process, it's so interesting because have you ever heard of course, you've heard of Julia Cameron's morning pages?
Of course.
Have you tried that practice?
Oh, yes, of course. That's how, Julia Cameron's morning pages I did when my son was really little. And the people will say, how can you remember the memoir parts of Drink? And I say, because it was right in my morning pages.
Wow.
I would take down dialogue. I would take down memories, images. I have hundreds of red bound diaries, and I would just go back into my journals and pull out a scene.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So if your son was little and you got sober when he was 17 when you got sober?
Yeah, about that age.
Wow. So you had like almost decades of journals.
I had decades of journals,
Yeah. And you were a journalist for how long?
almost 40 years.
Ooh, you wrote a
Long
lot.
time.
You wrote a
I wrote a
lot.
lot. I wrote a lot.
You
I
wrote a
wrote a
lot.
lot.
Do you have any plans of writing any more books?
Yeah, so I want to write a book about solitude and aging. What does it mean when we have so many scripts for women of what to do, or men and women, what to do when you're young, go off to college, figure out a job, get married, have children, even how you go through menopause. And then we screech to a halt and everyone says, you're going to retire and play golf. What if you don't retire and play golf? What if you, like me, back to school at 64 and start again? Think about it. It's
Yeah.
completely different. So I think I think the future of aging is actually something quite different from what we have seen in the past. And
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious to explore it.
Oh, I would 100% read that. Went through menopause and then losing my mom. And I mean,
Hmm,
just these major, major life changes that were so disorienting.
I bet.
Right. And, and it's been a process of like, who am I now? And how do I
Hmm,
want to spend my time? Right. I would love to read how somebody else got through that. You're right. There is very little that I've even heard of from women who have already been through it and found, because I'm like you, I don't see myself ever retiring, total
no,
workaholic. It's just, there's something about expressing, for me, there's something about expressing myself and being useful that
yes.
is like the essence of life for me. So I don't see myself, but you will not catch me on the golf course.
Well, it sounds like you're going to be published yourself, which is really exciting.
Yeah, we'll see. I might have to call you for help. I might have to take your writing class. How often? So it's an 8-week class. How often do you offer it?
Almost around the year. So the next one starts on the 29th of March.
March 29th. Okay, well, this will come out at a good time. Well, I'll make sure that this gets out before that in time for people to join. Um, is there anything that you would like to share that I haven't asked you?
No, you have been exquisite.
Oh,
You're so welcoming and
really?
calm, and yes.
I'm gonna ride that one for a while.
Oh, good. Ride that one.
Yeah, we're trying to let go of my external validation junkie, but I was informed that it's okay to feel good when somebody likes you.
Oh, yes. I think that's definitely true.
Well,
No, it's
Anne,
been a wonderful interview. Thank you.
thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I know you're so busy. I just want to say thank you for all the work that you have done and continue to do. Your voice is so needed. So thank you for continuing to shine your light.
Oh, thank you for having me. Okay.